Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Scaling SaaS podcast brought to you by Zeno Digital Consulting Group. I'm your host, Brad Kavanaugh, and each week we sit down with SaaS leaders who are doing remarkable things in growth, innovation, and customer success. Our goal is really simple: to uncover what's really working inside SaaS companies so you can take away insights that'll help you scale smarter. Today, we're talking about the quiet shift in SaaS, what your customers really want and actually want now versus what most companies are still delivering. And with that, I'm joined by Charlie Cole, president of XGen AI, a generative AI product discovery platform working with brands like Valentino, Marc Jacobs, and Sonos. Charlie spent 20 plus years leading digital transformation at Samsonite, Toomey, and FTD. And this is the first question I'm going to ask him. He recently shared some research about showing only 7 out of 700 AI vendors are actually using real generative AI. I'm interested to hear more about that. So, Charlie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brad. I appreciate you having me and excited to have a direct and frank conversation about what is a fairly ambiguous topic. So bring it on.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like I don't know if you watch sports, but like everything that I watch, every commercial is either IBM talking about AI or ServiceNow talking about AI and how it can fix it. And so I'm really interested to hear how you came about the Cornell study and what are the implications of that?
Well, so the story of how I came about it is actually kind of a funny one. So I was on the floor at Shop Talk in Las Vegas at the end of March of this year. So call it 6 months ago. And I hadn't really announced that I was working for XGen yet. It was sort of like my coming out party, frankly. And I was walking around the floor, and this gentleman came up to me, and he looked at my name tag because there's this sort of classic moment that happens that when someone comes up to you, Brad, and they're looking you in the eye, and then they look down at your chest to look at your name tag
Yeah.
real quick, and they're like, I think we've all like I think if you've been on the brand side most of your career, it's a moment you dread because it means the person's probably going to start selling you something, but that's not here nor there. But that's what this gentleman did to me, and then he goes, XGen. He's like, you're from XGen. I'm like, well, sort of. I'm brand new. And he proceeded to tell me he was from Cornell. And as his prep for Shop Talk, he looked at all 700 vendors that were presenting at Shop Talk this year. And he wanted to actually understand how people were marketing themselves and how people were talking about what they do versus what they really do. And so he proceeded to do a study that basically talked about what were people saying in the market, what were they actually using, and I'll be honest, Brad, like I couldn't tell you his methodology because I'm not a researcher with a background in AI from Cornell. He knows more than his name is Lutz, by the way. He knows more about it than I ever will. But he basically said, like, look, of the 700 vendors here, something like 30 some on percent of them claim to be using AI. And around 70 of them claim to be using generative AI. Based on my research, it's more like 7 of the people here are actually using generative AI as a core part of their technology. Everybody else is just talking about it. Everybody else is just basically using that, they're using it in a way that even though 100, 200, 300 of them are saying they use generative AI and saying they use AI, only 7 are using what's called multimodal generative AI. And we are one of those 7. And so for a guy that had just signed on to work there, I was immediately intrigued and started talking about like what that actually means. And it's basically the ability to sort of think about your core technology in multiple modals, meaning it could be visual, it could be sound, it could be text based, whatever it may be. And so it was a remarkably rewarding thing. But I think it was also the kind of repercussions is it's really hard out there for people buying AI to figure out what's real and what's noise. And I think that's one of the
Right.
corner that that's one of the things that we always have to keep in mind whenever we're talking to clients is that this is all things we're trying to figure out today. And the definition of multimodal is just, you're using several different modes of this AI technology. And you really have to kind of explain why that has massive benefits to a brand, and in our case, predominantly retailers.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because it is obviously the hot topic, everywhere. I mentioned it earlier, and And so if they're not using generative AI or multimodal generative AI, but what are they actually doing? What are they? Is it just kind of the old if then, just statement? Like how are they getting away with? I mean, that's a huge number, right? I was 730% out of 700, so 70% aren't actually really using it. So what are they doing?
Well, I think what that really uses is they're using what's called monomodal AI models. And so, a story I just told recently at a conference I was at Retail Club, Brad, is that I think that AI as a technology really sort of entered the human mind and sort of the zeitgeist of our society back when Google kind of built AlphaGo, which was basically a computer that could beat other humans at Go. And in reality, at that point in time, there was a very kind of complex morphing of what was machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? Because machine learning is what most computers were doing back there, which was basically running complex math problems very, very quickly to allow them to anticipate the best possible permutation in a chess game or a Go game or whatever it may be. So there used to be
Right.
confusion there. And then everybody started saying AI and they'd use it interchangeably with machine learning. And then they started saying multimodal AI, but it really wasn't. So usually what folks are doing is they're doing it for one very specific modal, such as text generation, such as image generation, such as video generation,
Right.
right? And so the good example would be in our space where we do sort of e-commerce optimization and conversion rate optimization and revenue generation based on websites. Some folks might do one specific modal, which is they're doing text analysis, but they're not actually doing image vectorization. And so I think that there's a lot of half truths out there that are kind of buried under technicalities. But the good news is for me is that what I care about is that my stuff makes people more money. And so if we can actually apply these AIs across various layers of their data and use it to serve search reactions, not just in text-based analysis, but in image-based analysis, then it gives us an advantage. And so I'm happy to kind of have competitors, frankly, use it as a buzzword because ultimately we want to be judged on our results, and that's where I think our multimodal approach gets to true advantage.
And so being multimodal, how does it give you that advantage? Is it simply just because it's more powerful, it's more flexible, you can integrate it into different platforms? Like what is that? Why does multimodal kind of make it more of a superpower rather than just one?
So let me give you a very specific use case because I think it's the best way to kind of explain this. Is one of the things we do amongst kind of our suite of applications is we power on-site search. Okay, and so for years, the way on-site search worked is the two-sided marketplace was a person would come to your website and type in a search query, right? So say you're on Valentino and you type in blue dress. And then what the search engine would do is it would basically go and look at what's called your product feed and said, okay, who here says blue dress? Well, this person has a column called color, and a lot of them say blue. Check. This one has a column called category, and a lot of them say dress. Check. And then this column has a product description, and this one says, this blue dress is the most beautiful blue dress on the face of this earth. Now, I'm obviously giving a remarkably crude example, right? But that's how search would gauge relevancy is it would basically say, this says blue dress, that says blue dress, and that says blue dress. Therefore, I should serve this as an answer, right? That's how search engines have worked basically since the 90s, right? Literally, is that's how
It
search
makes
engines have
sense.
worked. Yeah.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, so what a multimodal architecture would be is it would layer that, which I would call text, but it would also say, okay, show me every picture of a product you have. I want to look at the ones that look like a blue dress. So now you actually are using what's called image vectorization to decide what is and is not a blue dress. Therefore, if someone in your product feed calls something blue, but maybe it's moving more towards aubergine, right? Then it's going to go below the ones that are bright blue or royal blue and like truly blue. So it's almost like a computer deciding what blue really means. And then you layer onto a concept called context. So in this case, blue dress doesn't allow for a lot of context. but maybe a blue dress in the winter will serve different results than a blue dress in the summer. Or somebody in Seattle, Washington, searching for a blue dress on December 1st, who maybe they're trying to get a dress for a holiday trip. So in that case, I just described a multimodal architecture of text, image, and context. So now I have three different ways of anticipating the results, and then they layer against each other. And the punchline is, Brad, you just get better results. And what does better
Right.
mean? The nice thing is I don't live in an ambiguous world. Better to me means more people click and more people buy it. And if we're doing that, that's the advantage of doing a multimodal architecture. Otherwise, again, it's just a buzzword. If it doesn't actually drive better results in the form of a better result for our client, then it doesn't mean anything. But in reality is that's where we think we actually have a unique advantage over this space where we can actually beat pretty much anyone in a test at any time.
So someone might be, searching for a blue dress, but the actual list of products, to your point, might be a little off, a little less blue, a little whatever. And so in the old days, they might get, I'm using this is a poor example. I would just say they might get one result because that's the text is the color blue. But in the new world, they might get 10 different results because in the searcher's head, it's not just royal blue, right? There's a broad view of what blue could be. So now they have actually more products to be able to look at and choose, which then leads to obviously more purchases and better served customers. Is that what I'm
Yeah,
hearing?
and yes, but I'll go one step farther. I wrote an article about this a few months back where it also unlocks the ability for brands to talk to customers like humans. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So, Brad, I'm sure you've been to a website. Let's just stick with the you're buying women's clothes website. And we don't need to go deeper into that, but let's just say you're driving deeper women's clothes, and you go to a website and you click on the search bar, and sometimes there'll be recommended searches. And the recommended searches are literally pretty simple: dress, pants, blue dress. And the reason being is we as users have been conditioned to search the way the engines are built. And so one of my
Mm-hmm.
favorite statistics that kind of articulate this is that I've been very fascinated by the average query length on Google versus the average query length on ChatGPT. And so
Yeah, that's
recently, the average query length on Google has started to approach 4 words. But on
yeah.
ChatGPT, I did the search. I asked ChatGPT in January, how long is your average query length? And they told me 8 words. I just did it again last week, and they told me the average query length was 23 words. So now let's go back to our dress website. Imagine if you had a search engine that users trusted, that they would say, I am looking for a blue dress for a Hawaii vacation for my family photos. Boom. Now you have image, context, and text, but more importantly, you don't have the old contextual based search engine that's just going like, well, shoot, none of these say family photos. Well, shoot, none of these say Hawaii trip. What are these irrelevant for? And what happens on that old fashioned website? We're sorry, you have 0 results. And so
Right.
we are actually not only enabling better search results for like the menial terms, we are empowering brands to like ask their customers to ask them for what they actually want, because users are getting more and more used to in the agentic world of asking for what they actually want. So Lord knows that brand websites need to keep up. And so it's not just giving results based on how you think of search. It's actually literally changing your UI to empower users to search for what they're looking for.
That's really fascinating. I never really thought of it that way, but it's like our we don't know that we're doing this, but our brains have been trained to do booleans, like search operations in our head, and we're just typing in this plus that, not that, and be done. But now what you're saying is it's just it's so much more wide open, back to a more of a natural language. Tell me what you want, why you want it, where you're going to have it. And if a product like yours can support that, that's a game changer. That's actually a game changer.
And it's not unusual. It feels unusual now, but I'll make I'll make a personal analogy for you. I got my first electric car about 3 years ago, And if you ever driven an electric car, the most interesting thing it does is it doesn't have a torque curve, right? So you
Yeah.
think about a normal car, it goes like this. And so you as a user are just used to that, like, don't just punch it because then it'll be super jerky, right? And even you compare like an automatic transmission and a stick shift. An electric car, you just go like this, boop, and it goes straight up. And
Yep.
so we as users adopt new technology all the time and change our behavior all the time. Like, when was the last time you used a remote control for your television with 1,000 buttons on it?
Right.
Now, an Apple TV has what, five? And so, like,
Yeah.
I think that the most interesting conversation I have with brands is like, well, yeah, but when people come to my site, they search for dress. Well, what do you think you're prompting them with? And so this is something that's happening in like this agentic world, and the term is prompt engineering. We're
Hmm.
encouraging brands to do their own prompt engineering to break that old behavior. You don't have to pretend like you're driving a 1967 stick shift anymore. Not that there's anything wrong with that. The reality is
Uh,
this technology is different and allows you to drive it differently. And that's kind of that where we really are trying to help brands unlock the potential there.
so pushing brands to really encourage their customers to break out of that old 1967 stick shift and come into the future.
I don't know if you're a Seinfeld fan, Brad, but there's this that when Kramer's being movie phone and he can't get George to press the right button, and he goes, "Why don't you just tell me what movie you want to see?" That's basically what we can do on site search today.
Oh, that's a brilliant one. I love it. I love it. No, that's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. All right, well, let's shift gears just a little bit. Let's talk more about, your the company itself. How are you guys implementing generative AI in your own kind of operational processes, whether it be sales, marketing, customer support, onboarding, retention? I mean, there's all sorts of ways, obviously all these operational processes. Have you guys put any efforts into that? And what does that look like?
I'd like to start with sort of an embarrassing personal story, which is this is 100% true. I posted about it on LinkedIn about 3 weeks ago, Brad, so I can't really hide from it. So I might as well own it. I am the least visually inclined person I know. And so if there would be a blind contest between me and Brad Kavanaugh and be like, okay, both Charlie Cole and Brad Kavanaugh are going to have a contest and we're going to judge it, and it's going to be whoever can draw the best blank. I promise you I would lose. I am the worst like artist I've ever met in my life. I always tell one of my favorite people on earth is the creative director at Toomey. His name is Victor Sands. And when we talked about working on the website together, because I was the guy who was supposed to make money on the website, and he was the guy that was supposed to make great products and make the brands look good, sometimes those can be at odds. And I'd be like, Victor, you'll love me. I'm a colorblind statistician, which is true. I am colorblind and I'm a numbers guy. So I'm never going to give him feedback on whether or not his stitching on his bag is right. However, if there's data on the website that gives him feedback, I'll want him to know about it. But I went on LinkedIn about 3 weeks ago and I said, I need to be able to make my own marketing slides because I've never done it before, right? Like in my past life working at brands, I would basically just give my content to some brilliant graphic designer and my PowerPoint decks would look amazing. Now I'm on the vendor side and we don't have a graphic designer. And so I actually got a bunch of brilliant ideas. People referring things like beautiful.ai, people referring things like gamma. And next thing you know, like my PowerPoint decks look a lot better. So that's just a fun personal story. On a more
Sure.
systemic story, we definitely have adopted AI, and this is where I think a lot of folks have. Brad is on the coding side. AI is
Yeah.
remarkably powerful on things like QA. Obviously Copilot has sort of become this massive piece for a lot of developers, so we're certainly not an exception to that. And then I also think a place that we rely very heavily on it is we love to basically import sort of our lead and sales funnel into a forecasting tool. And so basically, like, hey, here's our call history, here's our email history, here's everything we're doing, what's going to happen next based on what you see. And that's a place where the AI is just akin to do it extremely well. And so I think that FP&A world, the financial planning and analysis world, I'm kind of shocked that AI hasn't disrupted it even more, because certainly the potential we see is pretty massive from a forecasting perspective.
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% correct in my opinion. I spent a few years working on basically kind of redoing VMware's internal sales forecasting methodology and tool, and we were trying to create, kind of going back to our previous, discussion. We were trying to create the old way of just having the data to do that, right? To project, to look at scoring, again, project, give me that percentage of if that deal's going to close based on the fact that I've called them this many times. And, so having all that data, now I can see any real AI tool could just pull that data together and really come up with some sort of percentage or score in a sales forecasting environment. Yeah, that's seems like a very logical next step for some builders out there. Um,
It's one of my favorite ways to. So if I was to frame your question in a slightly different way, Brad, and I was framing the question like, where should companies be looking, right? Because every company's needs are different. Start with what artificial intelligence is good at. What it's
yeah,
good at is you put a bunch of data in one bucket and you put a bunch of goals in another bucket and you ask yourself, how should I combine these things? Right? Because that's all forecasting is I'm going to take every single data point I can give you, and the goal is predict what's going to happen next. That's what AI is naturally very good at. And so go back to my site search example. Let's take a bunch of data, every product picture, every product description, every piece of context we know about buying clothes, and let's go to a goal, show the most relevant product. How do you define relevancy if they buy it or not? I just created something that artificial intelligence should be really good at. And so for people that are thinking about where to start, just start there. Start where you have a bunch of unstructured data that you would like to structure and optimize towards a goal orientation, and it should be very, very good at it.
with so forecasting is kind of on the backside of sales and lead generation. Are you doing, like, how does X Gen AI, like, who's your, I mean, is it just, you know well, let me just ask this more plainly. Like, who's your ideal customer and how are you actually getting business? Is it just traditional sales, just knocking on doors and making phone calls, relationships? Like, how does X Gen AI get new clients?
So our traditional or like our ideal customer, I would say, is anybody that has a direct consumer e-commerce business, call it, over $5 million US. The reason why I'm putting a low limit on there, Brad, is that we do incur a good amount of costs at startup. And so it's really just kind of getting to that sort of minimum contract value for us. So literally anyone who sells anything online themselves. Uh, I don't think that'll be true forever. I think ultimately what we're doing is actually showing a lot of potential implications to kind of expand to marketplaces. So Amazon sellers, et cetera, we're just not there yet. So that's the first answer to your question. The second answer to your question is I'm going to warn you, I have a very untraditional answer to this question. Um, we do not have business development reps. We do not do cold, we don't do like email drips. Like, I'll tell you one of the things I hate the most as somebody who I've told this to many people, but this is the first job where I've gone to being the guy who's buying the drinks. I've had the guy who's had the drinks bought for me my whole career because I've been the one buying this stuff and now I'm the one selling this stuff. But like one of my biggest pet peeves was, say you, Brad, were selling me VMware just because you brought it up, and you sent me
Yep.
one email, right? And that email said, "Hey Charlie, it's Brad from VMware. Do you want some VMware?" And I said, "No, thank you." How many times I am then put automatically on an email drip campaign from VMware makes me just livid. And so we're not doing
Right.
any of that. We're doing it almost purely relationally. We're trying to meet the what 6 to 10,000 people on Earth that want to buy our stuff, and then we're amplifying our successes. And until we lose a test, I'll be able to look people in the eye that I've known for 20 years and be like, "Look, we're worth your time," or else I wouldn't be doing this. And so I think more and more as technology becomes that much more impactful to people's P&Ls, it's about putting up the right results. And I will be 100% confident going head to head with anybody until I have data that tells me otherwise.
That's interesting. It definitely is going against kind of where a lot of people are going nowadays, right? Is just using technology to get in front of everybody with either email or LinkedIn outreach, or all the different ways that people are getting in front of people.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. I mean, and I think that I want our results and like me being out there talking about what we're doing. I mean, what you and I are doing right now, Brad. I mean, the reason I'm doing this, A, I just really like the way you approach me, but B, this becomes an amplification place for our brand. And if someone sees it and it's like, oh, I want to learn more about it, mission accomplished. But what I'm not going to do is chase everybody who views our podcast down on LinkedIn and serve them advertisements, because I just think that that's a fairly inauthentic way to connect with folks. But don't get me wrong, I'm acutely aware of the content I put in the world is hopefully being compelling for us. I just try not to hide the fact that ultimately our job is to sell you stuff.
Sure, of course. What about how? What's the time frame to bring a new brand kind of on board? Is this a weeks or months? What do you how quickly can you spin up a brand?
I love the way you asked that question because it's sort of a gotcha question for sure. I will give you, since I've been here in the 6 months, I'll give you the low water mark and the high water mark. The low water mark is 2.5 weeks. The high water mark is a little over 8. And so the complexities that come there is based on predominantly creative customization, because the engine is the engine and the ability to integrate it behind your product feed and behind your data is usually relatively formulaic. But the customization on how our engine presents data can sometimes lead to a lot of like a myriad of creative implications. That's where sometimes that 2 weeks becomes closer to 8 or 9.
Because we've struggled a little bit with data integrity, right? Because I mean, obviously, all of this information, the AI is always based on some sort of data, whether it's structured or unstructured. So a lot of times we'll get in there and the data is just, really, really bad. Do you guys have to do data cleanup at all, or can you really just go into a brand and just kind of take it as it is?
We've yet to meet someone that we can't just use their product feed and take it as it is. Now, the one thing I will say, Brad, is we have partnered with other folks out there that do what's called feed enrichment, that'll push like data in real time back into the product feed to enhance our results. We're here for it. It is certainly not a need to start, but it can lead to better results. So, cold start, give me what you got. Have we ever encountered a problem? No. Can you improve upon your product feed? Absolutely, would be my direct answer.
All right, let's shift gears again a little bit. Let's look in the future. So what in the next, let's say, 12 to 24 months, right? What excites you the most about what you see, not just your technology, but the technology in general? I mean, where do you see kind of the biggest opportunity? I mean, this kind of goes back to your question about kind of where to start, but if we're looking in the future, where do you see the biggest opportunity for kind of SaaS companies with AI? Do you have any insights of I'm sure you talk to a ton of people. What are you hearing? I mean, what does the next 12 to 24 months in this space look like?
Well, I think you sort of have to compartmentalize this answer into how do you respond to macro shifts versus where can you really define shifts in your own industry. To me, I have never been more confident, Brad, and I'm talking specifically in the retail and e-commerce landscape because I feel like that's the place that I can speak to somewhat educationally. I have never been more confident in my life that AI and generative AI native technologies and SaaS are going to replace the legacy stack that I've installed my whole career, right? So
Yeah.
when I go back and I think about where disruption is going to happen, I think about email service providers. I think about site search. I think about recommendations. I think about analytics and forecasting. I think about inventory planning. I think about dynamic pricing. I think about dynamic promotions. Everything I just described should work better leveraging this as a protocol. And I use the word protocol very intentionally because just like when I entered e-commerce in 2008 and people were building shockwave flash websites, HTML worked better, right? And so like you really have to sort of think of it sometimes as where can you shift your mindset from a code-based and protocol perspective. And I'm not sure if the creators of AI and generative AI would appreciate being called a protocol, but that's how I think about it, is that like, let me change my rails and I'm going to improve. I've heard of a bunch of businesses, and when I hear them, I'm like, dang it, I would have bought that. I would have stripped out what I had, and I would have gone after this. And so I think that there is a true like shockwave like moment that's going to happen in e-commerce SaaS over the next 18 to 24 months. And I think it's already happened. And so brands that can be early adopters and have a semblance of risk tolerance, I think have a unique advantage over their cohort. And so that's like something that it's a remarkably self-fulfilling thing for me to say, right? Because that's the world that I'm playing in today. But over my 6 months now of really living it and talking to brands and seeing the technologies out there, I am utterly confident that there's a bit of a tsunami coming that'll benefit brands, benefit customers, and sort of change the SaaS marketplace altogether. Can I tell you what I'm not
That,
excited about?
sure. Yeah.
All right. So this is what I think is going to limit what I just said.
Okay.
Self-preservation. I think there's an old adage that I'm gonna use the brand name and they get kind of lumped into the cliche, but this is certainly not meant to poo-poo IBM. There was an old adage when I was coming out of college, which was no one ever got fired for hiring IBM.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are going to be slow to adopt new software because they're scared it might change their teams. And I'll tell you a personal story from this. I've spent time as a private equity CEO. And the first time I said that by adopting GitHub Copilot, we've increased developer productivity by 40%, the question was one of two things. Does that mean we expect 40% more? Does that mean you fire 40% of your developers? So I
Right.
think the fear is real, but I do worry, and I'm not excited about self-preservation limiting the adoption of this technology. And frankly, that's not really relevant for what we sell, but I do think it's very relevant for the SaaS ecosystem altogether. And SaaS providers are going to have to think about that as they're entering their own sales cycles.
I think it's a valid insight. I mean, it's always these types of technologies always have that fear aspect to it. The disruption part of it. Um, no, I think that's exactly right. The other thing that I'm afraid of, the one thing that I'm afraid of is, when government gets involved, right? So what are the
Mm,
regulations going to be that could stifle innovation, that could create challenges? If let's say, and I'm not knocking California, but let's say California, just comes up with some just draconian AI regulations, that always kind of will flow down to the rest of the states because no one wants to build worry about different regulations. So they're just going to go to the worst or the hardest and build to that, and it could really really stifle a lot of the innovation that we're seeing just exponentially right now. And so that's one of the things that worries me.
well, and I think that's a warranted fear, right? Because deep down, folks kind of fear what they don't understand. And
Yeah.
I think, Brad, we'd be disingenuous if we didn't, address the fact that this is certainly a technology that can be used for negative and for evil, right? And so usually, you think about the, nuclear power, how quickly power plants went in and then how quickly they got regulated, right? Like, so there are these technologies that can be foundational, very good, but also weaponized. And certainly this
Yeah.
is one of them. And so I think that your fear is a very warranted one and probably something that every government in the world is thinking about.
All right, last question. I asked somebody this the other day. This is more from an operational standpoint. If you could wave a magic wand, like what would be the biggest operational challenge that you're struggling with right now? If you could wave the magic wand, and solve it, what would that be?
Oh, I just love this question because it's like I think every executive that hears this question has like six things popping in their brain, but you're forcing me to say one. Uh,
Right.
and so, you know, um, my honest answer, and I don't think it's something we are bad at, but I think it's something that everyone can improve at, is we're a fairly distributed company. We have people all around the country, all around the world. I would love to leverage AI to make my connection with my employees better. And there's a little bit of an oxymoronic logic in there, right? Which is I want to use this sort of non-personal, non-one-to-one thing to make my relationship with our employees better. That said, I do think that there's signals where it's just like, hey, Charlie, you haven't checked in with Deanna for a while. Hey, Charlie, you haven't talked to Julian about his performance review. Hey, Charlie, you and Mark are like haven't talked for 10 days. You want to reach out. Hey, Charlie, do you know that you've been here for 14 days and you've never talked to these people? Right. So I think there are some tools out there where For me, I've been doing virtual leadership for almost 10 years. So it's not something I feel foreign to, but I think it's a place technology could really help leaders do a better job of being intentional about communication. And I think that's a place where all of us can improve. And for me, culturally, it's something that I'm always very worried about. And so I think my first place would be people management.
Nice. Nice. All right, I think we're about out of time. So Charlie, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been a really insightful conversation about where AI is heading, where SaaS is heading, what customers want, what's good for brands, e-commerce. Um, I love it. So from, just from our audience standpoint, for me, kind of the takeaway is not necessarily just pile on a bunch of features, or even you have to kind of question the things that you're doing today. How do you stay loyal to your customers? And new technologies can do that. It doesn't have to be always kind of the old way to do it. So it's been really interesting conversation. So do you want to tell the audience where they can find more information about XGen?
Yeah, so www.xgen.ai is our website, and honestly, just connect with me on LinkedIn. I write about this stuff all the time. I rarely write about us. I kind of connect the fact of what we're doing into larger things. I wrote a fairly whimsical post today about how the marketing ecosystem feels like it's shifting, but it never does. But please just find us whenever you can. And Brad, just as an aside, I've done a lot of these, and I always worry that I'm going to say the same stuff over and over again. But I feel like this is most like I've never had a conversation like this, so I really appreciate you giving me the time.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So finally, if you guys have enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, share it with someone who's building a scale or scaling a SaaS business. Charlie, thanks again for being here. It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure, Brad.